universities have a really quite critical approach to teaching international development or development studies. And what's been really consistent in that is the reaction that we have been getting from the students, undergraduate students, often come in full of enthusiasm and wanting to do development because they want to, make the world a better place, help the poor. And then they learn about all the problems and the difficulties and the complexities, the contradictions, the failures of development. And while they're really appreciative of that kind of critical teaching and are really realizing why they need that knowledge, the second reaction that usually comes along with that is, but what does this mean for me right now? I'm learning that nothing works. I came into this field because I wanted to work in it. I want to make a difference. And all you're telling me at the moment is that's not the right field to be in. And it's complicated, it's difficult. I understand all of that, but what do I do with this knowledge? So this feeling of becoming quite disillusioned and quite cynical is something that that I have heard from students. And then when I started to talk to my colleagues about it, I realized I wasn't the only one who was getting these kind of reactions. So then for me, it became a question as an educator, what do I do with these responses? And how I started thinking, how can I find a way in which this critical teaching that's really important is still there, but how can I also help students move beyond this impasse that's creating? And for me, one of the answers was to think much more about the role of creativity and imagination in the classroom. So for me, the objective of my teaching is now to, yes, teach critical thinking, but also foster students' imagination and help them to imagine and then work towards what I call kind of alternative responses to global challenges. So it's a kind of a questioning of development, but also a way of nurturing hope or keeping their hopes alive in a critical way. So then a few years ago, I've actually decided to turn this into a research project. And for 3 years, I actually looked really systematically at the teaching that we are doing at the University of Sussex. We have a School of Global Studies, which has the departments of international development, anthropology, geography, and international relations. And we all teach into the ID program. It's both undergraduate and postgraduate. It's really interdisciplinary. And over the course of the 3 years, I interviewed lots of students and staff. I had lots of kind of informal conversations and interactions. I did in-class observations in my colleagues' classes. And I also used my own kind of classes as experimental spaces to try out some of these creative activities. And in addition to that, I did a period of research in Bolivia because I was quite interested in alternative responses to global challenges, economic, ecological, and social challenges. And I'm a trained Latin Americanist. I also wanted to look at a place where alternatives such as Bon Vivir, for example, have been generated. So I spent time in La Paz and visited a number of different universities there to also get a global South perspective. And basically what I've came up with, and I've just published a book late last year called Creative Universities, Reimagining Education for Global Challenges and Alternative Futures, came out with Bristol University Press, is a so-called critical creative pedagogy to help students better understand these challenges, but again, to imagine alternative responses to it. And I've also set up a website, creativeuniversities.com, where there's information about the book, but also loads more. I have interviews with creative educators. I have resources. I have a blog. So it's become a bit of a project. But here is this critical creative pedagogy. I've created this visual, which I think of as kind of a guiding star or the flower. And as you can see here, it consists of those 4 petals or strands: whole person learning, the use of design and arts methods in the classroom, praxis, and critical hope. And what I want to do in just kind of the next 10 minutes, give you some idea of each of these strands and some of the activities I have created in my own class, And then really have put together an exercise called What is Your Challenge? Where I invite you to reflect on a social, economic, or ecological challenge that is pertinent to your teaching and how you're teaching it at the moment and how you might bring in some of those critical elements. And then I hope we'll have a discussion around this. So let's start off with whole person learning. And this is really quite fundamental, but basically inviting students to come to the classroom, not just, with their intellects and as brains, but really acknowledging that students have bodies and emotions and senses, and creating a classroom space where they're invited, if they want to bring themselves more fully into the classroom. And at the same time, also really making clear that their own experiences on campus, where they live, are really important sources of knowledge, and really in opening up the classroom where this kind of knowledge has a valid place. So it is about creating those inviting structures. It needs kind of quite careful facilitation to do these safe spaces. And one of the ways in which I've done that is in a course, a third-year specialist module I teach called Urban Futures, where we talk about kind of, urban issues, urban development issues, both in the global north and the global south, but also very much with a forward-looking way in terms of how can these issues be addressed. So we do all kind of the theories. And Sussex, where I am, is located very close to Brighton in the southeast of the UK. And most students move into Brighton at the end of their first year. So by the time they're in third year, they will have lived in Brighton for a couple of years. So I actually base a lot of my teaching on Brighton as a case study, and the students engage with the city. They write a manifesto for the city. They build scenarios thinking, how can the city be made more equitable, more sustainable, for example. And I start off by asking students to become more conscious of their lives as Brighton residents. So they keep a diary for a week where they basically, they track their interactions, where do they go? How do they feel about particular places? Who do they interact with? And then I invite them to, I used to invite them to kind of create images or a small video or build an artifact and bring that into the classroom and kind of introduce themselves as Brighton residents to their classmates, and also become much more conscious of their lives as Brighton residents. And then, of course, we had COVID, and we moved completely online. And when I taught the class during the pandemic, during the lockdown, I realized really quickly that I needed to build into the exercise a way for them to acknowledge the impact of COVID and how their relationship, if they were still in Brighton, had changed. So we did it all over Padlet, so where the students were uploading, photos and stories and poems. But I also really consciously invited them to reflect on how have their lives in Brighton changed? What are they missing? What are they mourning? And really acknowledging, the real disruption that had taken place. And the Padlet that was created in the spring of 2020, which is on my website, which I share with the permission of the students, was really amazing in terms of the way the students, showed pictures of what they were missing, but also things they were discovering, for example, nature in Brighton and connecting more with the ocean or something. So it was really interesting, and a space to, again, as whole people, bring themselves into the classroom, even online. And on the basis of that, the second strand is the use of design and arts methods. And again, that's, for me, it's a way to really enact creativity in the classroom. And especially design, I have a general interest in the use of design methods for international development. I've kind of researched that and published on that. And there's a number of concepts, for example, the idea of wicked problems, and introducing students to global challenges as wicked problems that are really complex and interlinked is, for me, a really useful concept. For me, design fosters students' capacities to imagine things, to experiment, but also to empathize with others, and to ask these really open-ended questions and become quite comfortable with situations of ambiguity, right? Where there are either more than two answers to a question, or indeed where there are no answers or solutions at all. which is sometimes quite difficult for students who come to uni because they want to have the knowledge about, how to do development properly, and saying, well, that way doesn't exist. It's a matter of engaging with the complexities and then finding different ways forward. The other thing that design and the arts allows to do is really highlight the materiality of teaching, which I think too often goes missing in social science classrooms that are more kind of, paper or increasingly screen-based. So as you can see here, once the students have written their Brighton manifesto, we actually have a session where they build, where they develop scenarios, and that's really kind of hands-on, and I bring in lots of materials and they work in groups and they create, in this case, it was around kind of social spaces. And it's quite interesting to see, it really shifts the atmosphere when they work with their hands, but it's not just their hands, it's also their senses. So, I mean, I don't know how many of you are using, for example, Play-Doh in the classroom, but I often have a reaction when the students open up the Play-Doh and the smell first comes out. It's like, oh my God, reminds me of my childhood. So bringing students back to a really kind of creative or playful period in their lives, which then sometimes they're able to translate into the classroom. So for me, this idea of hand knowledge and playing with materials as a really different way of learning, and I'll write about that in the book, is another really important part of critical creative teaching. And then the third strand is praxis, which I do obviously borrow from Paul Lefrère, and this idea that practice is really important, but it's a practice that needs to be informed by theory, by reflection, and by dialogue. And I think especially in international development, as we've heard kind of throughout all the presentations, this reflectivity is so important, so we don't slide into saviorism, white saviorism, other forms of saviorism. And that's because our students are sometimes coming with a certain kind of, naivete into the classroom. Usually when they are in third year, they have been disabused of that, but still really important to bring this reflexivity in. But, applied learning, problem-focused learning, I think of it as learning by doing. And somebody actually yesterday said learning by doing together, which I really, really like. But for me, it's a really important way of learning. And it's a way of, you learn about different theories, different conceptual frameworks. But how do you use this knowledge? What do you do with it if you're actually trying to apply it to address a particular situation? And the example I have here is of a map of Sussex campus, where for one class on urban infrastructures, we actually turn Sussex campus, which is quite compact, but it's also located in the middle of a national park, into a mini city. And the students get into different groups and they're researching 4 infrastructures before the class, and then they're mapping out their route across campus, and they're walking together in the form of a walking seminar, and they're mapping wherever they find instances of those infrastructures, and they're taking note of, how are they interacting with people, how are they interacting with the natural environment, how sustainable do they seem, and then they come back in the classroom and they use these maps to do presentations to kind of the rest of the class becomes like a hypothetical senior management team, and an important part is to make recommendations for how to make those infrastructures more sustainable. So this particular activity also incorporates learning outside, which I think is a really important element as well. And students often come and saying, I never thought about a walking seminar, but it was actually really interesting. And I became really aware of aspects of campus where I've been hanging out for the last 2 years that I've never noticed before. So again, it's making students really explicitly aware of their environment and how they are inhabiting their environment, and then thinking of different ways of doing that. And that links to the kind of the last really important strand, which is critical hope. And I think it actually just came up in one of the previous presentations where Nathan was saying, how do you keep hope alive amongst the criticism, which is really important. And my answer to that, and I didn't coin this term, I mean, Paul Lefrère used this term, and many other people have, but it's this idea of critical hope, which is a hope that is very aware that is, it's not wishful thinking, it's not kind of a fantasy or naivete, but it's reflexive, it's reparative in terms of thinking of, you know, past injustices, but it's also active and forward-looking. And in the book, for example, I interviewed a lot of students at Sussex who were really integral in organizing the big Fridays for Future strikes in Brighton in 2019 that brought out about 10,000 students into the streets. So really kind of looking at how students take their knowledge outside the classroom in terms of activism and other things. But I also teach an activism class myself at a master's level. And that class, again, is is a mix of theory and practice, where students take the second half of the term and actually get into groups and design their own activism campaigns on an issue that they choose. And we kind of look at different tools. Each week we have a workshop, and at the end they write a report and they do a presentation on those campaigns. So again, it's very much, how do you apply theories that we learn at the beginning of the module around activist work, around issues of representation, issues of voice, issues of participatory democracy, unruly politics. How do we now apply that to a potential campaign addressing an issue that the students agree on, you know, needs to be addressed? So that's my critical creative pedagogy, and I'll just show you what I want to do now, and then I'm going to stop sharing so we actually can see each other. But what I thought we could do now is, so this exercise I've come up with is what is your challenge? But I invite all of you to reflect, I think first of you on your own teaching, and to what extent you might be addressing particular challenges, social, economic or ecological challenges in your teaching, and how you're currently teaching students about it. And then maybe pushing yourself a little bit and thinking, how could that teaching be a bit more creative? Or you're incredibly creative already, and then you can just share that with the group. And then if you have some ideas to maybe even think more concretely, what is a creative activity that you could design, really design and implement really easily? So I would, most of my activities are non-assessed, which makes it a lot easier for students to engage freely, but also, you know, if you have a non-assessed activity, then there's more space to experiment with it and to bring it into class. Shorter activities are easier to start off with. And then also think about how your students might react to this kind of a change in teaching. And I've set up a Jamboard for all of us to share. And then we are 17 people. So I think it might make sense to go then into breakout rooms and we have a smaller group discussion, because I think we have enough time, and then come together for a, definitely have enough time. I'm going to stop sharing and just wanted to see any questions, any reactions, comments, before I'll invite you to reflect on your own teaching. It's really nice to have a full hour, so we don't actually have to rush at all.
Anke, I just want to come take all of your classes.
Thank you. Thank you. Willie.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really wonderful to hear. And the phenomenon you describe of students kind of learning to be critical, but then feeling quite demoralized and hopeless even, is something that I imagine all of us can recognize. I definitely see that all the time. And what I have found, and I guess my question to you is, like, to what extent do students want to, and are you comfortable, and are they comfortable taking that conversation to a fairly deep level? I think this is kind of implied when you talk about teaching the whole human, but ultimately it's a philosophical, existential, and some might even say, you know, spiritual, religious type of conversation about, well, how do you move in a world that's filled with injustice and complexity, and how do we kind of sit with complexity and relinquish the natural impulse for clarity and easy answers? And I guess the question there is just, to what extent do you find that students are willing to, like, take it all the way to that level, or is there some sense of, well, hang on, I signed up for international development, not philosophy, not, this isn't meant to be a therapy session? Or do you find students that are like, yeah, I need a therapy session right now? Because I very frequently find myself in the latter, and I love that, but I'm wondering how that manifests for you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think I would say it depends. It depends on the students. And I'm very mindful of creating a classroom space where students who feel the need to engage with that to different extents feel comfortable. So I wouldn't wouldn't ever say to somebody they need to go further that they wanted to. And I think because my teaching is quite pragmatic, and I'm really interested in terms of how to apply critical thinking to responses. I don't talk about solutions. I have a real problem. So to responses, we often slip more into the practical mode while considering kind of ethical and political questions. Now, I do have colleagues who I interviewed for the book, for example. I talked to one colleague who does body mapping in her class, and where I know there is a lot of that kind of a more internalizing and maybe a little bit of therapy, but she also has a particular training in that. I think that's the other challenge, to what extent we actually have the skills to facilitate those deeper and more probing discussions. And talking to her, I don't know if I could ever create that atmosphere in my classroom. So I think it also depends on what educators and students are comfortable with. And then I do sometimes have students who say, well, I'm not really interested in with the creative activities, but because they're non-assessed, again, it's often like, well, give it a try. And then, but some definitely get into it more than others, if that answers your question. And also I have to say that Sussex, because we have a certain reputation, we get quite critical students coming in from the beginning. So they're open to that as well. Oh, I've lost, I think Jennifer and Nina.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. I mean, you've raised numerous issues for me, particularly dealing with different particular modules. So in my development studies module, that my students are predominantly struggling with lack of confidence, which creates a distance from the material, and real challenges with reflecting on their own experiences. You've raised lots of issues for that, but I'd like to ask you a question similar to what Willie just asked and what you've commented on. In my human rights program, entirely unrelated, our Erasmus students often come in with 5-10 years of working experience in the field, but we can slide into conversations, particularly in our sessions about advocacy, into trauma. And their own lived experience. We've had, students who are former child soldiers, or who are, have come to join our program because they're currently persecuted at home. And I'm not a skilled counselor, and can struggle in the classroom in those moments where the real truth comes out, and they're, surrounded by their peers, how to manage that. And I wonder if you have any, or anyone else in the group has any experience of those real truthful moments and how to handle them.
Well, what I can tell you is I have a colleague, Lindsay McLean, who convenes an MA, Gender, Violence and Conflict. And as you can imagine from the title, whoops, you just disappeared. Where are you? As you can imagine from the title, the kind of people who are taking this module are interested in learning about sexual violence and what to do about it. And she's actually just written up an article, which she submitted to a journal. So hopefully that will come out soon. But she also talks about usually at least 50% in the class are survivors. And she is incredibly reflective. She's been teaching this MA for 7 years now, in terms of the different strategies she has put in place to do that. So I'm very happy to actually connect you to her. And I just know, because I just read the article before she sent it off. I think maybe because of the material that I teach, I've not had things like this in the classroom. I've had it more kind of in office hours, and I think having those conversations one-on-one is a bit easier. But again, I know from especially my colleagues who teach around gender and conflict issues that it's not easy, and it does take a lot of skill and experience. I'm sorry I can't give you more tips, but if is anybody else in the room who maybe
That's very helpful. If you don't mind sharing her name and connect me, that's great.
Yeah.
If there are other experiences, I'd be keen to hear them.
Yeah. If not, then Nina, I'll just put her. Do you have a question or comment, Nina?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry, my screen froze. I wasn't sure if I was still connecting. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. This is, so just want to put this out there. We use a different art form than design for creative engagement. And a lot of the things you're talking about, we talk about, but we start from theater. And I'm just trying to, I don't have so much of pronouncement, but I'm just trying to think about how that engages different things. It brings out different things, or different, it maybe brings out some of the same things, but the kind of matrix around it is different. So it ends up being very relational. It ends up being a lot about empathy. And so how you're plugging in is more, like you're saying, you know, responses rather than solutions. This is sort of a kind of emotional, cultural, you know, a holistic sort of engagement of another position than your own. I don't know, I'm not sure. I think it'd be very interesting to combine them. I was just making notes like, let's bring design in, but theater ends up, because our classroom is very diverse. There are some really easy and clear ways to just ask people to bring in their whole selves. You know, tell a story, tell the story of your name. It's a game I think a lot of people play where, you know, you have to be responsible for someone else's name, you have to present it. But it feels to me like it creates, I'm trying to think in relation to what you've presented. It creates a sort of, and the questions that are coming up, it creates a kind of safety, I think, even though theater is very scary to people. If you call it theater, maybe that's problematic, but if you just let people start engaging relationally in that way, bring in their energy, and we've always had this pressure to make the physical, make the Zoom space physical, because we've always had a Zoom classroom. And so it's kind of embodied and it feels full with each other. I guess that's what I want to say. It's a little abstract, but it makes for an atmosphere. That it's a creative atmosphere, but it's also a very communal sort of atmosphere. Anyway, there's a lot we haven't learned about it yet, but I wanted to just kind of throw it out there as a different art form.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I just want to obviously point out that I absolutely loved Marilyn's presentation yesterday, and the way that you were able to, just even with the video showing the embedded way in which you know, students were working with their hands and doing things. And I mentioned my website, and I have these teach talks where I interview different educators, and there's somebody Mika on there, who is a trained yoga teacher and meditation teacher, and she does meditation with her students, and she talks about how that changes the classroom atmosphere. And again, it's very embodied, you know, in a different way from theater. But again, she was talking about how if she hadn't had the training she has, she wouldn't be comfortable doing that with her students. So again, it's interesting, but they're different, and I wish my classes would be more embodied in this way. I think you know, there's definitely ways to go. As I'm always really interested in learning what other people are doing. But yeah, I've heard about theater and kind of theater of the oppressed. I know some people who are. I'm
excited to jump into your book. I just want to mention that how we got started and how we continue in a lot of ways with feeling okay about doing theater, though we don't feel we're professionally trained to manage the classroom that way, is with a partner. So we have a theater partner. They do applied theater and they come to us. And so anyway.
Yeah. Brilliant. I'm just looking at, are there any questions in, I see lots and lots of comments, which I might look at while you are doing your reflection, because I don't want to take time. But are there any immediate questions, or are you ready to maybe dive in and do some of your own thinking and sharing? Or Marilyn, did you want to? Sorry, there's a few more hands. Sorry about that. Didn't want to foreclose the discussion. Marilyn?
Yeah, I don't know if now is the appropriate time to ask this, but I feel like I wonder about your experience pitching creative pedagogies within your, because honestly, that's for me where I find friction. And the dynamics at campus are really interesting. Like I get a lot of support from the teaching and learning services office who are excited about, you know, critical and creative pedagogies and some of the things that you're doing and practicing, but a lot of resistance within my faculty. So how do you, because some of these things, I don't know if you have costs associated with this, but a lot of it just comes down to the sort of nuts and bolts of administrative regulations, some of which was actually covered, you know, Willie, you guys were talking about that yesterday in the theater piece. How do you grab? I feel like I'm always pitching and trying to convince people this is going to work out, you know? That's why I had the video, because it feels like a really uphill battle.
Yeah, it's a great question. So in the book, I talk a lot about working in the cracks. So for me, this really started off kind of both flying below the radar screen with my own activities because they are non-assessed. I could just try them out. But the other thing that happened is that this project actually, I started when I was head of department, which was, and it so happened that our ID program both went through a portfolio review at the time, but also massively expanded. So it was a fantastic opportunity for me working with a really, really innovative head of school who was on the same page with this particular vision. We actually put critical hope at the center of our curriculum to revise the curriculum and to hire about 5 new people who all had really similar teaching philosophies. And that meant that there is kind of a lot of support in. I think within the department, we are all, I think would say very much on the same page. So we talk, and that's why I was able to write this book, because I was able to interview so many of my colleagues. And to be honest, I haven't really tried to take it further up yet. So at Sussex, we have this big top-down thing called the Pedagogic Revolution. I haven't really engaged with it yet because I don't know if I want to take it all the way to senior management. I'm quite happy to do it at the school level. And the book has actually really helped opening up beyond the department and engaging with people in other departments. And it's been mainly positive, but I've had things saying, yeah, you know, not everybody wants to be creative in this way. And I said, well, that's fine. I acknowledge that. And that's why I talk about making these spaces really flexible. So I had those kind of discussions, which I absolutely, and in the book I talk about, the book is not written as, you know, this is what you have to do. It's kind of an invitation to learn what I'm doing, what my colleagues have been doing, and to experiment with that. So I'm totally realized, and I talk about the politics and the ethics behind this kind of teaching. There's a particular agenda there, and I think I need to be really honest about that. So, but because of a number of circumstances, I've been quite lucky and I haven't really had to battle the bureaucracy on this. If I took it much further, I don't know, but at the moment I'm quite comfortable with the way it sits within the uni.
Thank you.
Rebecca.
So as the timekeeper, I have 2 things I want to suggest. One is we only have around 22 minutes left, but can I just say, Anke, that I appreciate so much the way you have engaged us. I feel like this fills an important, it fills up my cup, and I really appreciate this. And in fact, if going into breakout groups is something you feel strongly about, if a Jamboard is something you feel strongly about, I'm fine with that. But I would love to just continue this conversation and maybe just ask everyone to share something, you know, in that format of the circle discussion, if that's something you think works. I would love to just continue to talk as we're talking. What I wanted to share also is, if this is how we proceed in the next 20 minutes.
I'm so fine with that. I'm so happy that you're engaging. I do not need to break up the group, and yeah, let's just keep going.
Yeah, and I really feel like we sometimes provide so many busy work activities for students that they get lost in the busyness of it, in this like results-based management, instead of reflecting on learning outcomes. And anyways, so to me, the conversation is just so important, and it seems like a great one to me. What I wanted to share with you is I'm preparing a lecture for Monday, and it's on development ethics. And I was like, what am I going to talk about? What are some scenarios I can use? What questions can I get my students to engage in the discussion? And I just wanted to thank you, because through your discussion, your comments today, I came up with this idea of asking students to reflect on what does an ethical international development studies classroom look like? And just to get them, and I screenshotted that amazing little drawing you have, which I love. I think it's a wonderful little summary. It captures so well all those pieces that are so important. And I hope, if it's okay, I can use that for my discussion and cite you. And just to say that I think those conversations are just so useful for students, because one of the things we struggle with is finding examples that students can really reflect on. Like, what do they know about development? Well, they know what the classroom experience is like. They know what it means to reflect on development issues. And I really wanted to thank you just for inspiring me, because it saved me like a day of work. So it's wonderful. In doing the work that you've done, you know, one of the things that I find frustrating is that we gather all this valuable information as teachers, as colleagues, but unless I have ethics approval, I couldn't write a book on the sort of things that I've learned. And so I'm wondering, did you have to jump through that hoop, and how did you navigate that sort of bureaucratic issue? That's my question for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I was head of department. I couldn't really travel, you know, anywhere to do field work, but I was talking about teaching all the time. So for me, it was actually an opportunity. Why don't I turn this into an official research project? I got ethics approval, which was fairly straightforward. In terms of interviewing the students, I only interviewed, so most of I call them journey interviews. I interviewed them at the end of their 3 years of undergraduate studies, so that students felt really comfortable sharing. And then when I got feedback on my own classes, I always did this, you know, after all the marking had been done. And I think that was important for the ethics, and making it really clear to the students that whether they participated or not, and what they said didn't have any kind of implications on their grades or anything. Other than that, it was, I think the ethics approval was fairly straightforward, but yeah, there were consent forms. And but so for me, because I was in this admin role anyway, and then I had a year of research leave afterwards, and that's when I wrote the books. But it all worked out fantastically. But and I talk about, and actually, I mean, you know, there's so much literature. I don't know where you're based, but coming out of Canada, I think that's the place where I think people have most critically engaged and written about their teaching. But in the book is that we all teach, but we often don't write about our teaching, because we might not have time to reflect on it, or because or because we think our other research is more important. So for me, and the book's actually quite personal, and it was really different from writing. I've had another book before to do that. So it's also really just fantastic to get such positive responses. But yeah, I did go through the hoops, but they weren't too difficult to go through. Yeah. Swaroop, where did you have a question like a while back? I just really want to make sure I'm getting everybody. I haven't had time to go through the
Oh,
chat
I actually have a question, but it's a kind of comment I have. The comment is that, but when in a group, even we are also discussing in India, what we understand the critical hope is very different. Is that India's education curriculum in the grad level and the undergrad level, and as well as in the 10th and 12th standard is very, very much different, and which actually make a kind of illusion. So this is a problem. What I am actually thinking of right now from your understanding is that we are having the colonial hangover. That's the problem that we are all facing. This hangover, we are not, even recently in 2022, we have the national education policy in the place. Now, problem is that despite all this national education policy claiming that they are completely decolonial in nature, but it's completely westernized. Now we are confused. Now our students are confused. So how we do deal with this kind of situation in developing countries' perspective? I understand that UK's perspective is very different, US perspective is very different. And when we deal with this kind of challenges in terms of curriculum development, how to incorporate decoloniality or critical pedagogy or critical pedagogy or these kind of things, this becomes a very challenging for us. So my question is very simple, is that how do you deal with these kind of challenges? What is your take on for developing countries' perspective on this?
Yeah, thank you. And I actually have a couple of answers. So one is that I actually got contacted by somebody in India who is quite interested in starting an India chapter of this, and I can put you in touch with him. And he talked about the whole shift towards the liberal arts in the Indian curriculum, and he wants to kind of engage this critical creative pedagogy. So I can link you up to some people in India who are thinking around that. But the second answer is I did research in Bolivia, and that I think I confronted some of the questions that you're asking here, because I did interviews with people at kind of mainstream universities, which are, I think, quite similar to the westernized universities, also when we look at the literature, and then at indigenous universities, and then at a private Catholic university, and had such interesting discussions with people about kind of decolonizing and the importance of, reading the canon in development and engaging with that literature, and saying, well, if we don't, even students saying, if we don't read the dead white men, how can we engage with them critically? But I saw some of those questions, and how do we engage with the decolonial literature coming out of Latin America, with some of the people saying, well, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't buy into this. So Bolivian colleagues, so this confusion, it was something I had lots of I don't have an answer to it at all, but I did recognize what you're saying in some of the Bolivian interviews, and I saw that people really grappled there. And one of the things, in my chapter on ecologies, I write about Bon Vivir, which is this, I don't know if any of you are Latin Americanists, but this kind of alternative approach to development coming out of Latin American indigenous thought, which has been taken up as kind of a global discourse, and people would say has become institutionalized and tamed. And I use this to see how can we talk to students about alternatives, and also say alternatives are not always, romantic and idealistic. There's politics attached to these as well. But so I absolutely recognize your challenges, and if you're interested, I can get you in touch with my Indian. I think he's planning a workshop or something. So we're more than welcome if you.
I think it's very important. I think we should engage ourselves in this.
Thank you. Should I read any more questions, or should I just go through the chat, or do we have a chat person? Did we have anybody? Rita. Have you had time to read the chat? I'm just saying you're our chat facilitator. I really don't want to miss anything. Oh, Hillary. You're an alum of Sussex. She's still here. No.
I am, yeah, Anke. So a lot of your discussion around the benefit and the disillusionment, was something that I experienced, and that interestingly, I started working with the Master's in Development Practice at Emory in 2015 and finished my PhD in 2017 and have approached a lot of the curricular development that I've worked on in our MDP program at Emory with this, trying to figure out how to marry the theoretical lenses that I feel like I was introduced to at Sussex with more of the practical tools that I left Sussex feeling like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to apply any of the really interesting, important theory that I had learned. And so, yeah, so I can't wait to dig into your book.
Yeah, I know Sussex, that was part of why we redesigned the curriculum, because it was really super, super critical. It still is, but we're giving students something else now. I thought somebody commented on the materiality, Nathan. Yeah, I think that's, and then there's the Play-Doh one. And really, I've had people saying, oh, what do Play-Doh and pipe cleaners ever do for development? And I just like, okay, you know, you might feel this way. And it's just a way of getting students to learn differently and take in things differently. I'm not, yeah.
But currently, under the COVID situation, I'm maybe school kind of hesitant to let students use their hands. I mean, because of the possible contamination, possible transmission of disease. So maybe like a design thinking activity, or maybe some other activity which use materials that we used to do, we cannot do it. And the question you posed to me, I was thinking how I can recreate those activities, maybe even online, through online system, but maybe it doesn't give a real sense of, you know, how it is feel to do that kind of things with hands, you know, with the papers, whatever. So do you have any idea about, you know, how we go about, you know?
So so I used a lot of Jamboards and Padlets, but it's not the same. When I had to teach my Urban Futures class wholly online, it was all right, but it wasn't the same. But again, I had one of my colleagues, she put together activity packs and actually sent the students, you know, some Play-Doh and some pipe cleaners. And I think Marilyn asked about the resource implications of that. And I think we have a small budget. Sussex is not a wealthy university by any means, but we do have a small budget kind of for, you know, office items. And that usually, so we can buy materials for our classes. And this particular colleague, she got everybody's addresses and then sent things like this out. And then they were all sitting kind of similar to what Marilyn's students were doing yesterday. They were all sitting at the camera, building together and then sharing their creations. So that's probably as close as you know, you can get during COVID. And we are back to in-person teaching. And last term I did run a building session and everybody had masks on. And I made sure that everybody was comfortable handling things. But we also had all committed to doing just a lateral flow test before we got into that particular session. So as much precaution as was possible. But yeah, COVID definitely threw up some challenges.
Sure. Okay. Thanks very much.
Yes.
One quick comment that I had that this conversation is really making me think about is a piece of sort of like reflexive praxis that we've been doing within our program is to apply a lot of the practical skills that students will hopefully use in their work to our program itself. So for instance, we have a qualitative methods course that then leads into a qualitative data analysis course that happens over a year. And we piloted this year having students interview alumni about their experience in the program, both from a kind of practical, what are the skills that they're using now, and also what are the critical, what kinds of, more to Willie's and this whole person idea, sort of like how did their education influence the way that they approach their work? And then that has formed the data set that students are analyzing in their qualitative data analysis course. And that their final deliverable is presentations to us as the program staff and faculty on kind of how, what of that might we use to integrate and think about how we adjust the pedagogy of our program. And it does seem like students have been able to therefore kind of grab onto some elements of kind of hope and the seeing the potential power of their engagement in that process. And so I just wanted to share that because it feels like an exciting way that we've been experimenting over at Emory.
Yeah, thank you. And I just quickly, I know there's a couple of hands up, but I think Nathan posted a couple of things also about critical hope. I don't know if you're here. Do you want to say something, Nathan? Or you said about kind of the way it might subvert power relations.
Yeah, I mean, I think you responded to this. Marilyn asked a very similar question earlier. So I think you already kind of responded to it, but I think that some of the university structures and policies oftentimes can impede, what that relationship between the professor and student looks like. And then, my only other comment was that, I think critical hope is a hot subject now, but it's been around for a long period of time, and a lot of communities have had to engage in various forms of critical hope for, centuries, if not millennia. And that in our program, it was wonderful to kind of think about why it is that this has become such a hot topic for us as privileged students now, when other folks have had to engage with it for much longer. But thanks for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good point. Yeah. I think Nina and Swaroop and Willie, how are we doing on time? Are we good? Who's keeping time? 4 minutes. Wow.
Just a quick one. Just want to know from you one thing is that we have a tendency to romanticizing decolonialism and decoloniality. So I just want to know how to stop it.
To romanticize people.
Yeah, romanticizing decolonialism.
Yeah.
And we are having this problem. So what is your suggestion on it?
Yeah. I think that's why I talked about Bron Revere, because because it's indigenous peoples and its relationship to nature and ecology, there would be a real danger to saying, oh, this idea of indigenous peoples as timeless ecological guardians. And I use that as a way of saying, if you look at the politics, at how some indigenous communities, and I have actually 2 colleagues who are doing research with indigenous peoples in Latin America, and I bring them in. So again, as an anthropologist, also that's my background. I come back to ethnographies. I come back to people who do these really grounded studies to work against that romanticization that sometimes I think can come in with talking about alternatives and seeing that they are not pure or in its innocent spaces either. I just want to say one other thing. So there's a couple more people. So I really like Arturo Escobar's work on design, and the other people who have really influenced me is Gibson Graham's work on both diverse economies and kind of becoming academic subjects of possibility. So if any of you need more inspiration around this kind of stuff, their work is just amazing.
I think we all anthropologists need to think about it.
Yeah. So Nina.
Just a quick sharing. We had a course last summer that we launched that included a lot of very, very direct kind of creative activity that made me very nervous because I thought it wasn't justified enough. The very first assignment people had, it was leadership, the course. And their very first assignment was everyone had to write a poem that began, I am. And I thought, I have no idea how this is going to go over because I was kind of co-facilitating, but it wasn't my curriculum. And I was just amazed at what students came up with and how readily they just dove in. And it was across all kinds of cultures. And it was from students, especially who were, to my perception, in really high stress situations. And what they reflected on later at the end of the course, but then subsequently, I just had a round of testimonials from students who are in their third year, was how much that whole course, all the creative work they did, and it was all self-reflection. It was mandalas and poems, and how much it helped their mental health as development practitioners, which isn't quite the same thing as critical hope, but it is, it gives, it's not worrying this question about where do we get hope. It's more like just making yourself feel robust through creativity. I just thought it was an amazing, it was amazing how it worked out. And I don't know, I just offer that. Creativity per se, not towards solutions or hope, but toward just that human engagement was really helpful for our practitioners.
Well, I think you raise another interesting point, which is the courage it takes on the part of educators. Because you said, if I understood you correctly, you said you were pretty nervous. So, you know, we ourselves have to be really, is this going to work, or how is this going to work? And fair, I mean, he talks about, the courage to try things out over and over again. But I think also acknowledging that we are pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones too, not just our students, but ourselves as well. And, that takes courage. And I know we have to almost, Andrew, you talked about these games, and I just want to say, in one of my chapters, I talk about the use of serious games, and I actually spent a term in a class on climate change, uncertainty and preparedness. One of my colleagues has the students playing and then designing their own serious game, and that was absolutely amazing. That was, and so it's in the book, and it's also a little bit on the website. But yeah, I think games and especially thinking around kind of systems related issues in ecology, I think there's a lot of potential there, and I just saw it in your comments. I just wanted to bring this up. We've gone over now. Thank you so much, everybody. That was fantastic. I just loved you guys engaging with it. And I hope you learned as much as I learned from you. Thank you. I'll see you back in the other room.